Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Honorable Mr. Bambang, as a lecturer of theories and principle in ELT subject, me and my friend Anggi Aliski and Anggi Purwitasari, we will presentation chapter 16 about teaching listening. The importance of listening in language learning can hardly be overestimated. Self-reception, we internalize linguistics. Information without which we could not perceive language. In classroom, students always do more listening than speaking. Listening competence is universally large than speaking competence. It is any wonder then that in recent years, the language teaching profession has placed a concerted emphasis in listening comprehension.
Table of content, listening comprehension in pedagogical research, an interactive model of listening comprehension, types of spoken language, what makes listening difficult, micro skills of listening comprehension, types of classroom listening performance, principle for designing listening techniques, listening techniques from beginning to advance.
Listening comprehension in pedagogical research. Subsequent pedagogical research in listening comprehension made significant refinements in the process variant contextual characteristics and how they affect the speed and efficiency of processing oral language. For example, the research characteristic of proficiency, memory, attention, affect age, gender, background, mata, and even learning disabilities in the L1 all affect the process of listening. Even more recently, great attention has been devoted to strategy-based instruction of listening comprehension. All of these issues prompt teachers to consider some specific questions about listening comprehension listening.
An interactive model of listening comprehension. The here assign literal meaning to the utterance in many intents, literal and intended meaning match. So, for example, if one of your students walks into your office while you are madly grading papers and says he has a question that she would appreciate your answer to, then say, do you have the time? The literal meaning is appropriate. However, this process might take on peripheral role in cases where literal meanings are irrelevant to the message and is an metaphorical or idiomatic language.
Type of spoken language. In monologue, when one speaker uses spoken language for any length of time, as in speeches, lectures, readings, new broadcasts, and the like, the hearer must process long stretches of speech without interruption. The stream of the or not. The current comprehension planned attention to unplanned. Analysts differ considerably in their discourse structure. Planned monologues usually manage first with redundancy and are therefore relatively difficult to comprehend. Dialogue involves two or more speakers, can be subdivided into exchange that promote social relationship, interpersonal, and those for which the purpose of to convey personal or factual information, transactional. In conversation between or among participants who are unfamiliar with each other. Reference and meaning have to be made more explicit to assure effective comprehension. When such references are not explicit, misunderstanding can easily follow.
What makes listening difficult? Clustering, redundancy, reduced forms, performance variables, colloquial language, rate of delivery, stress, rhythm and intonation, and instruction.
Make micro skills of listening comprehension. Start a checklist of micro skills you can get a good idea of what your technique need to cover in the domain of listening comprehension. Academic lectures include for further, more specific micro skills starting in an academic stream need to be able to perform such things as identifying the structure of a lecture, weeding out what may be irrelevant or tangential, identifying the possible biases of the speaker.
Types of classroom listening performance. Reactive. About the only role the reactive listening can play in an interactive classroom is in brief choral or individual drills that focus on pronunciation. Intensive techniques whose only purpose is to focus on components, word intonation, discourse makers, etc. Of discourse may be considered to be intensive as opposite to extensive in their recruitment that students single out certain element of spoken language. Responsive. A significant proportion of classroom listening activity consists of short stretches of teacher language designed to elicit immediate response. The student's task in such listening is to process the teacher talk immediately and to fashion an appropriate reply. Selective. The purpose of such performance is not to look for global or general meanings necessarily, but to be able to find important information in a field of potentially distracting information. Extensive. Extensive listening may require the student to invoke other interactive skill, not talking and or discussion for full comprehension. Interactive. The listening performance must be intricately integrated with speaking and perhaps other skills in the authentic give and take of communicative interchange.
Principle for designing listening technique. In an interactive form skill curriculum, make sure that you don't overlook the importance of technique that specifically develop listening comprehension. Use techniques that are intrinsically motivating. Utilize authentic language and context. Carefully consider the form of listeners' response. Encourage the development of listening strategies, include both bottom-up and bottom-down listening techniques.
Listening technique from beginning to advance. Number one, for beginning levels, bottom-up exercise, discriminating between intonation contours in sentence, discriminating between phonemes, selective listening for morphological ending, selecting details from the text, listening for normal sentence word order. Top-down exercise, discriminating between emotional reaction, getting the gist of a sentence, recognize the topic. Interactive exercise, build a semantic network of a word association, recognize a familiar word and relate it to a category. Follow direction. Number two, for intermediate level listeners, bottom-up exercise, recognize fast speech form, finding the stretch syllable, recognize word with reduced syllable, recognize word as they are linked in the speech theme, recognize pertinent details in the speech stream. Top-down exercise. Analyze discourse structure to suggest effective listening strategies. Listen to identify the speakers on the topic. Listen to evaluate theme and motive. Finding main idea and supporting details. Making inferences. Interactive exercise. Discriminating between registers of speech and tones of voice. Recognize missing grammar markers in colloquial speech. Use context to build listening expectation.
For advanced level learners, bottom-up exercise. Use features of sentence stress and volume to identify important information, not taking, not, become aware of sentence level features in lecture text. Become aware of organizational cue in lecture text. Become aware of lexical and suprasegmental marker for definition. Identify specific point of information. Top-down exercise. Use the instruction to the lecture to predict its focus and direction. Use the lecture transcript to predict and content of the next section. Find the main idea of the lecture segment. Interactive exercise. Use incoming data to determine the accuracy of prediction about content. Determine the main idea on the sentence of lecture by analysis of the detail in the statement. Make inference by identifying text one, the sentence level that lead to evaluative statement. Use knowledge of the text and the lecture content to fill in missing information. Use knowledge of the text and lecture content to discover the lecture's misstatement and to supply the idea that he meant to say. Thank you very much. That all is our presentation. Thank you for the attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.